Welcome to Future Explorations. I'm glad you can join us. My name is Victor Martinez, and this podcast is dedicated to the exploration of the diversity in perspectives around the concepts of change as a constant we humans need to embrace, long-term thinking as an approach for everything we should build and create, and the limits that our human nature, physiology, society, environment, and technology impose on us by their own intrinsic characteristics. It is your task and mine to identify the connections between all views, to discover the interdependence and complementarity of knowledge and ideas. In that way, we might get a clearer picture of what that sustainable future could look like and how we can design the transition to get us there. Today I have the honor to talk to Dr. Ellie Perkins. Dr. Patricia Ellie Perkins is a professor in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change in York University, Toronto, where she teaches ecological economics, community economic development, climate change science and policy, and critical interdisciplinary research design. She has also taught at Eduardo Mondlane University in Maputo, Mozambique. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Toronto and has authored many publications on feminist ecological economics, climate justice, commons, and participatory governance. Her research and community projects with civil society and university partners address environmental and climate injustice, economic inequities, and the transition to a sustainable provisioning. She is a lead author on the Chapter 5, Demands, Services and Social Aspects of Mitigation of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change 6th Assessment Report. She directed international research projects on community-based watershed organizing in Brazil and Canada, and on climate justice and equity in watershed management with partners in Mozambique, South Africa, and Kenya. Her most recent international project with partners in Brazil, Chile, South Africa, Cameroon, Kenya, Mozambique, and Nigeria is building a global network of participatory researchers on climate justice, ecological economics, and commons governance. Professor Perkins, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to have you here.
It's a pleasure to join you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I would like to start by asking you a little bit about yourself, whatever you want to share with us, especially what took you to study ecological economics?
Well, I actually never studied ecological economics formally in my during my undergraduate, my master's program, and my PhD, but I decided to do a graduate work in economics because I was concerned about being a better activist. I wanted to really understand the concepts of economics because I felt it would increase my credibility as an activist. Most political decisions are made with economics in mind. Economics serves as to create a justification for politicians, but also for individuals and businesses with regard to how much things cost, whether things are needed in society, and all kinds of decision making. And so I felt that in order to critique the way society is structured and to understand how power relations work in our society, it was important to really get a grip on how neoclassical economics works and why the bottom line considerations that are usually raised turn out the way they do. So I decided to do a PhD in I wanted to study political economics. In other words, the interrelationship between the political process and economic theory and economic ideas about decisions. And at the time in the 80s, when I was thinking about doing this, the University of Toronto was the only university that still included its political scientists and its economics in the economists in the same department. In other words, U of T was where you could study political economics.
Okay.
So I applied there
Mhm.
and I got in. And the summer before I started my PhD, they split the political science department from the economics department.
Okay.
So I ended up doing economics, not political economics, but I was still doing it anyway because I was thinking about it, right, as I was studying economics.
I see, I see. So if, for example, if nowadays a person wants to do a PhD in political economics, how do you do? Because all departments you say are now separated, you will have to find an advisor that already works in that field, or how?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't want to make a blanket statement. I believe maybe there are some places in Europe where you can study political economics, political economy. And of course you can still do it. Many people go to political science departments when they are interested in political economy.
Okay.
But I really wanted to get that credential and challenge my brain around how neoclassical economics works. So that's why I decided to go to the economics side.
Excellent. Yeah, I share much of the feeling that of what you describe now, because I'm a designer. Obviously, my understanding of economics is very small, but in my PhD as well, I realized the importance of economics in all decisions, especially in the design field, in design work. So and on top of my interest of systems thinking, so I decided to read a little bit and be more aware of how and what, how it worked and where it come from, and so on. So I would like to start by asking some very basic things about our economic system. This is normally something that I do in my classroom. So this is going to be a good checkup to see if I'm doing it right or I'm missing something, especially precisely when I'm discussing the relation between design and design decisions with economics, and how many of the design decisions that we supposed to take, we cannot take it because we don't have really the power. The power comes from high above in this term, the economics and what is ruling. So I would like to start just by going through the basic etymology of the word, because I also found that at least in the English-speaking countries, is missing that part. And me, well, my mother tongue is Spanish, which comes from Latin, that is closely related to French and so on, and Portuguese. And etymology is something that we live all the time because it helps us understand the meaning of words, and I think is very important. So economics comes from the Greek, not Latin, Greek, but eco, which means home, and nomos, that means accounts. So the sense of the essence of the word economics is just keeping the accounts of home, of the family.
Yes.
It's important not to forget that.
Right.
And from there, I would like to jump a little bit about the basis of capitalism. So what I normally do with my students to explain capitalism is first the historical context. So the Wealth of Nations, the one of the most important books at the beginning of economics of capitalism, was written in 1776. It's more than 300 years old, and it's very important, the historical concept, because I think to understand that way, at that time there was the Industrial Revolution was just starting. There was still, for example, slavery was okay in most of the world. So it's important to understand these things and how much has changed humanity, and how much some of the assumptions of in the Wealth of Nations, like the rational man and so on, make little sense right now. But again, when I'm trying to explain capitalism, I say it's very basic. No, you have capital, land, and labor. And you invest capital in land and labor to transform land, which resources could be the better word now, and labor jobs, in order to gain capital back. So the focus of the main idea of capitalism is to increase capital
and the concentration of capital. There is no intrinsic order embedded in capitalism for the distribution of that capital. The main idea, if I own capital, I invested in order to gain more capital. So from that point of view, the most efficient way to increase capital is to increase the efficiency in how I use my resources and labor, which at the end, if you add the idea of free market, it's easy to understand that if I, as a capitalist, wants to increase my yield in capital, then I have to do labor more efficient, and makes complete sense if I find somebody else that is doing the same job for less money. That's how jobs from places like Canada or the US have moved to places like China. So it's not that the Chinese took our jobs. It's more the idea of that this structure of capitalism has makes us kind of victims of our own device. Is intrinsic in those rules. So that's more or less my explanation. Very, very simple. I am leaving out some important stuff, or is that I'm more or less right in that sense?
I think that what you have described is as a summary of the way neoclassical economics assumes that economic systems work. But there are some important critiques of the kind of perspective on that you've just outlined. With regard to distribution, Adam Smith says that markets work as if by an invisible hand to mediate and equilibrate, bring together the supply of things that are available for people to consume with the demand for people to consume them. And that demand depends on, of course, whether people have money to buy in the market the goods that they need, which can be everything from food to fancy clothes. It could be everything from basic necessities to luxury goods. So there are some problems with how the market equilibrates supply and demand, and therefore how what its impact is on equity across human populations, both within countries and internationally. But before that question of distribution comes the question of how the neoclassical model understands those things that you outlined: labor and capital and land or resources. When a business mines metal, iron ore, or coal, or cuts down trees, or gets fish out of the ocean, they are taking those things from nature for free.
They have no cost.
They're not. The only cost they have to bear is the cost of the people that they hire, or the ships that they need to make, or the machines that they need to make in order to facilitate that extraction from nature. And therefore, the capitalist, or the business that we're talking about, and the governments that lie behind this and facilitate it, are not really paying the true cost of those inputs to the economic system. And they have every incentive in the world to take it all and then to go somewhere else and take it all from there.
Yes.
And that explains globalization and imperialism and the climate crisis.
Pretty much, yes.
But I'm not done.
Yes.
On the labor side, who are these workers? Who are these workers that are there to be hired? Well, they are young adults, or even sometimes children. They're people of working age. How do those people even speak a language so you can communicate with them? How do they have a moral code or some discipline so that you can hire them and assume that they will come to work every day and be paid and not trash your factory? They have been raised by someone. They have been given birth to by someone. They have been fed when they were a baby. they have been sheltered in a house until they are old enough to become workers.
Yes.
Those costs are also not paid by the firms. Who in fact, they're not paid by anybody, because a lot of that work is unpaid work, what we call unpaid work. It is contributed by those children's parents when they're sick, even when they're workers. Who takes care of them? Who brings them soup? You know, who puts a blanket over them, right? Somebody is doing that to maintain that worker as an input for the capitalist system.
Yes.
And when they're old and when they retire, they are also cared for by people. And largely it's by women. And largely those women are not paid. They don't receive even a pension when they themselves become old, because of, you know, which ethically I would say should accrue to them because of all the work they've put into that system through their whole lives.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to outline here is sort of a critique, but a bigger picture of what happens and how the capitalist system and the neoclassical economics that describes that capitalist system only shows a partial view. In the words of some feminist economists, it shows like an iceberg. You can see the part of the iceberg that's above the water, but that iceberg that's above the water is supported by ice that's under the water that's 90%, you know, that's much bigger than the part that you see.
Yes.
And is very important to support that visible economic system.
Yeah.
The problem from a sustainability point of view is if you just chip away at that, at the support structures, if you ignore them and therefore your decisions don't pay any attention to the importance of their continuing, then you're going to have a crisis. It's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
And we are coming to that point. And I think COVID has demonstrated in many ways what that crisis looks like and the main elements of the crisis.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much for that. There is so many other things to say, but I'll just stop there. There is just one more point, and then we move on to ecological economics. I think this is an important base to understand even why ecological economics came to be. But before moving there, I think there is another important distinction to make, and that is the difference between the economic model and the form of government. They're not the same thing, and they don't have to be attached necessarily one to the other. I'm basically thinking about democracy and capitalism. And because I think people believe that they are attached, they are not, it's impossible to separate. And if you lose one, you lose the other. And obviously, I don't think that's true. And there are two basic examples, and there are many others. But the clearest ones is, for example, China and the US. There could not be more opposite examples. No, there are completely different models of government, but also in some aspects that are similar, but there are also very different ways of even looking at capitalism. One is state control, and the other one is based on free market. But there is, I think, the importance of this separation, a bit like some countries that want a secular state and has separated church from government, to understand that economic model and the form of government are not the same thing. So thinking in that perspective, then what will be the role of government in the economics, in the accounts of our house? No, because at the end, it's a larger question that I know is a bit off topic. I would like to ask a political scientist, the big question of what is the role of government in a society. But from the economic aspect, I know it may be hard to answer shortly, but what would you say is the role of government?
The ideology of economics teaches us that, or would like us to believe that economies function in and of themselves. that government intervention is not needed, or in fact usually interferes with the clean functioning of the market. But in fact, ever since even going back to 1776 and more nowadays, those capitalist, so-called capitalist markets can't function at all without a lot of government intervention. They need ports, they need airports, they need infrastructure, they need roads, they need regulation, they need labor markets, they need all kinds of regulatory and actual physical material intervention that comes from tax money that is largely levied on individual wage earners, which is taxing the wrong thing, in my humble opinion. You want to tax fads, not goods. But this interrelationship between government systems and the economic systems that that also are foundational to society, it can't be separated.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as saying, oh, you have to have democracy to have capitalism. There's also a lot of confusion there. And
Yes.
in fact, the most extractive and authoritarian type economic systems usually are accompanied by authoritarian government structures.
Yes, 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 absolutely. I agree. The idea of the form of government, in this case, I'm obviously a pro-democratic. The one of the ways that I explain, also I touch this with my students, at least for me, the one of the most important roles of the government is precisely this idea of regulations that you mentioned. And I know it must be much more complex than this, for sure, but what I'm referring mostly is these rules that were set so many years ago, understanding that the world has changed and those rules haven't really changed, and that this invisible hand is based on an idea of rationality of man that psychology has proven that is not at all real. You know, we don't make rational decisions. Humans are some of the most irrational things that we can imagine. So thinking of regulations to protect from abuse, for me that's the most simple answer on why regulations are important. Those with power will obviously try to maintain the power and grow it. That's what we've been taught. And as I mentioned at the beginning, that's the whole idea of capitalism. No, the ones that have capital want to increase it, and no intention of distribution. The idea of regulation is to avoid those extremes. And one of the worries that I have personally, and I have heard many people have, is that the government has been in many cases intervened by economic powers and for their own benefit. So that's a worrying situation, I think, that we have now. And I know we're getting into polemics and away from our topic, but before going there, if you want to add or have any opinion on that.
I think, yeah, you're right. It gets polemical really fast, but of course, I'm not the first theorist to think about this. There is theory that critiques neoclassical economics and existing economic and political economic systems going back hundreds of years. So.
Yeah, exactly. When I was reading about economics, again, I'm declaring myself ignorant. I'm just saying the things that I know, and I'm absolutely certain that I know so much. I don't know so much. But one of the things that surprised me the most is that there were critiques of this model since the beginning of the 1800s. So just a few decades after the Wealth of Nations was published, there were many other academics and thinkers that were saying, no, wait, this is not going to work, and obviously didn't pay enough attention, and here we are now. But Let's move now into the idea of ecological economics, because it's obviously from again what I read about it. So a little bit the story, if I may. When I was again doing my PhD and reading about economics, trying to understand the systemic aspect of sustainability, I started reading economics, and suddenly I had the urge of finding alternatives. What other people have thought about this essential idea of accounting in our home, no, the true essence of economics, and who else has done anything about it? And then I discovered ecological economics, and I was amazingly surprised. There are some amazing notions, amazing ideas there. So if I just start asking, what is ecological economics and where does it come from?
Ecological economics draws from neoclassical economics, tries to critique it and go beyond it by including the idea that, in fact, the resources on the earth are limited. Neoclassical economics assumed, going back to the time, as you said, of Adam Smith in the late 1700s, it seemed like there would always be more forests to chop down, there would always be more places to mine, there would always be more coal and fossil fuels, there would always be more fish in the sea. And starting in the mid-1900s, as it became clearer and clearer that this is not really true, that the earth is a limited sphere. It's energetically open to sunlight, thank goodness. And hopefully the amount of heat that comes in and heat and light that come onto the earth will get reflected again to space in an equilibrium. But the resources that are on this globe, the water, the forests, the land, the mineral resources, those are not being contributed to in any way. It's a miracle how sunlight can be turned by plants into, plants capture carbon from the air and build trees and their structures out largely of that carbon. Everything that's organic has been captured by means of sunlight from the air, literally from the air, and made into the things that we burn, the things that we eat, and the things that we use in large part for our housing and for our clothing. It's quite amazing. And for us, like we are organic.
Yes, I normally tell my students, if you think you are amazing designers and you can create amazing things, I'm going to give you a little bit of sunlight, a little bit of water, and a little bit of dirt, and please give me a mango. Let's see if you can make it. Obviously, we don't really appreciate the true amazing wonders of the nature that we have around. I'm totally with you.
It's not the materials in the dirt either, except for small trace elements. It's largely the carbon from the CO2, from the air, from the gas,
yes.
that is made into organic things. So ecological economics adds this consideration of limits, of material limits. Mm-hmm. And there are those within the field of ecological economics who, like feminist ecological economics, are ecological economists who go, yes, and the and part goes back to that question of where the workers come from, unpaid work, and the other services, the sustaining services contributed by humans and also by non-human, more than human nature to this process of creating well-being and livelihoods and a sustainable social structure within the limited, materially limited, energetically open earth that we live on.
And how ecological economics provides an idea of this accounting of the resources and labor and all that, because from what I remember still is precisely all about flows. flow of energy, flow of material, and accounting those in a way that there are no these externalities, no these costs that are not accounted, like you were saying before, and the whole idea, again, as far as I understand, is based on energy, and the energy accumulated on the construction or the building up of all these resources and elements. They come up with a terminology of emergy, that is all the energy embedded in all the things around us. And I found that a very attractive idea, in the sense, and it's somehow similar to what some of the things we do. In terms, I'm thinking about products and thinking about, for example, all the different steps that are required in order to make, this computer. Every single step requires energy, requires labor, and some of those steps are accounted. The way that classical economics accounts for those is pretty clear. But what will be then the difference that ecological economics proposes to do that?
You're right that there are a number of different contributions that ecological economists have made to the process of helping people understand how the resource limits and the service limits that make up the economy can be recognized, because many of them either started out invisible, like CO2 in the air being captured into organic things. That's a process of taking something that's invisible. Our eyes don't see the air, but they see a tree. Our eyes don't see an 18-year-old worker in a factory. I mean, they don't see the services that have gone into making that worker. They see the worker. They don't see where that came from, the invisible unpaid work that went into making that person able to show up for work each day. I'm speaking as a mother now.
No, I'm with you.
So emergy, as you mentioned, is a contribution by I don't know if he would call himself an ecological economist, but the idea of embodied energy, the energy that's embodied in something or someone, is one of the contributions. And another way to try to represent or make this visible is something like the ecological footprint, where you take, what is the land that would be required to produce this thing, or my own consumption, say in Toronto.
Yes.
What is my ecological footprint? And then there's the idea of the carbon footprint, especially for climate change. How much carbon, how many CO2 emissions are embodied in this computer?
Yes.
Or in my sweater, or in my dinner, So there are a number of different ways that ecological economists are working to try to assist us in making better decisions, and in bringing these realities related to sustainability into our personal decision making and our political decision making. And there are many of them. The journal Ecological Economics is full of these kinds of considerations. How do we come to see the limits, where they are impinging, and what we need to do in order to make our economies fit, and our livelihoods, and protect our livelihoods and our well-being within those limits?
Yes, I think it could be worth to explore a little bit further the idea of this concept of emergy, because what can be a bit abstract, but it's a way of explaining economic value. That idea of how much something is worth. So we were mentioning before that at least in classical economics, the value of something is built with different factors, but one of them is how scarce. But not scarce necessarily in terms of how much is out there, but scarcity in the sense of how many people want it as well. How much is it available, and how much people wanted or buyers wanted. And I was, again, many years ago reading about this, and the theory of value. I know is a long thing to explain, but one of the examples that I read is water and diamonds.
Yeah.
Diamonds are highly valuable and are completely useless. Is a piece of social construct that is telling us that we have status, that we can say also about beauty. Or for sure, I am all in there. I've been guilty of participating in that and giving a couple of diamonds to my wife, but is useless in a very practical sense. It has no use other than showing status and more cultural things. But again, I don't want to depreciate that. It's important. But water is essential to life, and water is valued much more less. So the idea of energy, is as far as I understand, is to have a different take on how to value things, and in a way that also accounts for these limits. To say, okay, yes, water is essential to life, and not only that, is actually scarce. Water that we can drink is only 1 or 2% of the total amount of water. So the idea of economic value,
declining because we're polluting the surface water. That 100 years ago there was a larger percentage, right?
If we can explore a little bit more this idea of economic value and in ecological economics.
So I guess the attempt by ecological economists to contribute some of these alternative or better ways of representing what's embodied in a thing, how the limits, so that we could see what the limits are. Those are all attempts to broaden our understanding of value and how to measure value. It's all, and basically it's a veiled critique of the market system, which says price equals value. If it costs a lot, it's valuable. Yes. If it doesn't, it isn't. And that's just so ludicrously destructive, to our ability to make good decisions.
And the idea of how people can manipulate those markets in order to modify prices to their own convenience. Is one example. I'm not saying that he necessarily get any benefit from it, but it's been lately a very interesting case of Elon Musk tweeting things and the value of things just going up or down like crazy. Yeah. And it's the tweet of one single man. So. Right.
And advertising is a concerted effort to do the same thing.
Of course, yes, exactly. And from there, the idea of really valuing things in a more comprehensive way, that gave rise also to the idea of ecosystem services. Would you be so kind to let us know a little bit about this ecological services, and how that plays in ecological economics?
So the biggest ecosystem service, I think, is the ability of plants and trees and forests to capture carbon and to produce oxygen for us to breathe. Right? Mm-hmm. There would be no animals on the earth without the prior activity of plants. And I'm talking geologically, in geological time now. Until there was oxygen in the atmosphere, there could be no animals evolve. And so, but the ecosystem services include far more than that. The oceans of the world are the single largest function in capturing carbon from the air and allowing us to continue to produce all the CO2 that we do. We would be much worse off than we are without the ecosystem services provided by the oceans. And we don't know what the limits of that are. We don't know exactly. Oceanographers are getting a better picture, but we don't know what the limits are of that big service that's provided. There's so many things so many services that are provided by the natural world for the economic system and for our own lives and livelihoods.
So if I understand correctly, the idea of these ecosystem services is to understand that as a service is a very economic
Capitalist
word.
term. Yeah.
Yeah, in the sense that we understand what a service is. No, if you call service and attention to service in a company, you know what it means in that sense. So I think it's a very interesting way of approaching a common term that everybody knows what a service is, to the biological aspect of our economy that has been denied so far. So I found quite interesting the idea of adding this very specific term of services to all the things that nature gives us that is absolutely essential to our sustainment, our living, and we don't really appreciate it and especially account for them.
Many of them are, we're trained not to see, I would say, either because they are invisible to our eyes or because we don't have educational systems that have taught us to, I'm speaking of Western.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
Don't have, we haven't been taught to see them and to respect them and to understand their contributions to our well-being. Think about the microscopic people that inhabit our gut, our bodies, that create a biome within us and allow us to digest our food. Or think about the small creatures and microscopic creatures in the soils that are the decomposers that allow organic material to be recycled and the trace minerals and elements that are in it to become usable by other life forms later. Yes. There are many, you calling them services really doesn't respect their munificence.
Yes, but I think it's a good way to approach that idea to the general public, which may not be as aware or I guess aware of very, very technical aspects of biology, and ecology in particular. So I would like to jump to something that I find is one of the most essential and beautiful things about ecological economics that I came across, and obviously comes from this idea of understanding the ecological services, ecosystem services, and how ecology actually works. And that is the idea of optimal scale. And I now mention Herman Daly because he's one of the most prominent ecological economists that I know of. Nothing in nature grows forever. Trees reach a point of maximum growth, and there are very, very specific, physics and chemistry rules for why that happens. Populations of different organisms, they don't grow and necessarily keep steady. They fluctuate, and that again, as far as I understand, is based on simple rules of thermodynamics. Is how much energy embedded is in a rabbit, and how many rabbit a wolf needs to eat in order to maintain his life, its life. And then you have this chain of energy and matter just flowing. When wolves don't have enough rabbits, sadly, some of the wolves will not live, and then populations decrease. So Herman Daly was exploring this idea of first, classical economics has no concept of optimal scale. The idea is continuous unlimited growth, which makes absolutely no sense in a closed system like Earth. But if we could talk a little bit about this idea of optimal scale, because then Daly came with this very interesting idea of steady state economics. So could we explore a little bit that?
Yeah, I think you've explained it in a fairly simplified way, and I think in some ways that's true, and in other ways there's a lot of unknowns about why populations of lemmings or monarch butterflies fluctuate, or any species may fluctuate because of a lot of interactions within the ecosystem, some of which are pretty straightforward, as you outlined, and some of which are not very well understood.
Yes.
But in any case, let's talk about the human population and the way in which the number of humans on the earth affects our CO2 production and also our demand for material inputs and energetic inputs to sustain us and provide well-being and livelihoods for the people that are here. One way to look at the situation that we're in now, the climate crisis that we're in, is to say, well, there are too many people. And especially there are too many people in the global north who are consuming 100 times more than the average Chinese or African or South Asian person. So in order to solve the climate crisis, let's just put something in the water in Europe, North America, and Australia so that people don't have children. Would that solve our problem?
Some people have done already some really horrible things. This is a very dark path to go into.
It's a very dark path, and it ignores something that I feel is very important and is also present in Herman Daly's work, which is the relationship between equity and scale.
Yes.
We know from empirical research about something called the demographic transition, which is the time at which human populations tend to level off and stop increasing at a high rate. The demographic transition happens when livelihoods and well-being are protected for most people to the point that they don't need to have as many children as they can in order to ensure that they will be able to eat now and in their old age. Secondly, the demographic transition happens when women have their economic well-being assured, whether or not they have children. In other words, when women are able to enter the labor market, when women are able to get paid for the work that they do, then they don't have to have children in order to support them. And their value isn't seen as related to how many children they have. So these questions of equity are so closely interrelated with the size of the human economy and what happens with the resources that we do bring into our economic ambit is really crucially related to how much and what kind of production happens, and also to how people reproduce themselves, how many children societies have. And that in turn is related to these questions of scale. So it's all part of a picture.
Yes.
And it's all, interrelated in the same picture. And for me, many ecological economists look more at the material boundaries and don't consider these service boundaries and these equity distribution questions, which it seems to me are equally, if not more, important in getting us to a better space materially and energetically.
Yes. Wow, that was pretty amazing. You mentioned so many important things that I think it will be worth to just go and touch a couple. First, the idea of population. Yes, for sure. I agree that there are so many studies that have shown that if obviously population, the amount of population that we have today raises their standards of living, will just push the limits of the planet to a completely unsustainable. But then what you mentioned is extremely important. I would like to make a very, very decisive and very clear comment here that because there are many assumptions that the question of where the population is growing and growing faster what is the contribution of that population towards the problems of the planet, specifically talking about climate change, and what can we do in order to stop that population growth or diminish that population growth. So just starting by saying that, and you mentioned it, that the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions is being the global north, and the global south is what people normally assume is the population that is growing faster, which in many cases it is. There are some really horrible examples of what some groups in the global north has done with a very narrow mind, thinking that what we need to do is just make the people from the global south have less children. And I come from Latin America, and I know, and I there are so many stories of, you know, missionaries from churches in the US, for example, that have gone to Amazon, the jungle and other places in Latin America, and have I don't remember now the terminology, medical terminology, but have done physical changes to women's bodies in order to inhibit them to have children, and that has no other word than a crime. So the importance of knowing exactly what is happening. I found an amazing researcher from Sweden. His name is Hans Rosling. Sadly, he died a few years ago. But in a website that is called Gapminder, he has some really amazing talks explaining in a beautiful, marvelous way precisely where these changes are happening, you know, where the population is growing, and he is very good at getting rid of some of those assumptions. And the other topic that you touched is extremely important, women and the work of women. So one of the best ways to reduce population or stop the exponential growth of population, and this is very well documented, is by educating young women, giving them access to education and better control to their bodies. And in relation to what you were saying about work, the idea of getting education and then going to work and get paid for the work they do, I think it's important to separate the work that is part of the economy, what you were saying before, and the part that is not accounted, like the housework and raising kids. That is also very, very important. And again, there are multiple perspectives and many things to say here. But the idea of for example, the African proverb of it takes a village to raise a child is sad to see how something as important as raising the next generation has been in some cultures has been seen as a pain, as something we must suffer. And if I may, I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time. I'm supposed to be asking you some questions, but I think it's important to give these points clear to our audience. One of the examples that I've been reflecting personally, this is just me, it's anecdotal. When you are boarding a plane, there is always, you know, before boarding the plane, there is always the announcement of who has priority. And I remember when I had the opportunity to live in Europe a few years. So when I was taking the plane to travel back to Mexico, and I had kids already, the preference is families with kids. And it's like, you have no idea how amazing that is, you know, to give the chance to families with kids to go first. Because having a child, you know, sitting in an airport for a few hours is so hard for the children and the parents. And doing the same thing, boarding a plane in the US, the first people that have priority is the military. And that tells me a lot. That tells me a lot about I mean, I don't want to make assumptions, but that tells you a lot about you know, preferences and what values lay behind a culture. And I'm just reflecting here on how you can take that further and understand the implications of those decisions in a larger context. No, and I touched so many things. I'm so sorry, but
Well,
anything you want to say?
let me just say that imagine if we had in our society opportunities like that, like the story you tell about boarding a plane. Imagine if we had the opportunity to consider periodically what it would feel like to be someone in a different skin, or someone of a different gender, or someone of a different sexual preference, or someone of a different level of ability, someone in a wheelchair, say. If we had opportunities to think about putting those kinds of differences first and see those people walking onto the plane or going into the school or prioritized in any kind of an emergency, instead of the way it is now, which is that those kinds of differences put people at the back of the line.
Yes.
And that's another kind of invisible but very important factor in the way our society works. It's just like invisible carbon being captured into trees.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
There's lots of invisible things. And in my view, I'm an educator. It's the role of our education systems to make us aware of those things.
Yes.
Or actually, many people are aware, to raise up those kinds of awareness, because they are very important.
Yes. And I completely agree with you. No, and again, this is anecdotal just with the people that I have around me. Most of the people I know, I will say all the people I know, they understand these things and they care about the equity and so on. The problem is the lack of options, and the lack of actual meaningful power. So what can I do as an individual? It seems that I am completely powerless. All these decisions are taken by people that I don't even see. Sometimes I see them in the television, and that's pretty much it. And that's part of the unfairness. That in a democratic country, it should be open for people actually deciding, taking back the demos, is the people in democracy. So going further with with topics, we are going off.
Can I just say one other thing?
Of course.
We were talking about women's valuing unpaid work and women's work in society and the important role that it has. And I just wanted to say that I believe the population question, or how to limit population, is really a non-starter for the reasons that we've discussed. But violence against women and actual overt killing and maiming and abusing women is something else that we don't want to see, even though it's present in plain sight in our societies. And this includes rich societies and poor societies. And it's something that is exacerbated in times of crisis.
Yes.
When there's stress and pressure, women get hurt. Violence against women increases. Elaine Enerson is a sociologist, I think, who's done a lot of work about to document this, and it's been documented in all societies, and we're seeing this now because of COVID and the climate crisis. Will, if it isn't already, in places where extreme weather events happen, in times of floods. Elaine has done so much empirical work on this. Times of floods or wildfires or ice storms, you name it, and it's often related to climate change. Violence against women increases. Mm-hmm. So we need to see this. We need to confront this, and we need to consider these questions of equity, values, and what kind of a society we want to live in.
Of course.
Because we are together facing the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced, which is the
Yes.
climate crisis.
Yes, I cannot agree more with you. And the one of the things that I've been repeating a lot in many of the episodes is the importance of cooperation. One of the most important traits in mankind, humans, is our ability to cooperate. That's what has made us unique. One of the things that has made us unique as a species. And it's so important to understand that psychologically speaking, there are so many things to say about individualism and the person and the growth of the individual, but as a collective, talking about all these things, I don't think we talk enough about the importance of cooperation and seeing us all as a group at the end. No, that we need to get our house in order to survive as a species. We could reach that point of risk of survival as a species. But I would like to go back a little bit to the idea of a steady state economics, if you allow me, connected with the population growth, because there is something that I've been thinking and I haven't heard anybody talking about this, and is related to the idea of continuous growth. No, in the classical economics, the idea that growth and how our in politics are so focused on GDP growth. One interesting thing that we have seen in the pandemic is the impact that has less people working, on the economy. And as you mentioned as well, in the future, by several factors, the human population is known to be reaching a tipping point. We don't know exactly what is going to happen. There are different theories that will probably go down, steady, depends on several things. But what is important here to think is that no matter what, it seems, it all looks like is going to tip and is going to stop increasing the population. So what is the take on this need of the economic constant growth linked with the population reaching that tipping point? I see some really severe issues, and I don't know if the idea of Herman Daly of the steady state of economics has included this issue of or fact of population. Any thoughts?
Herman's first book about this came out in the late 80s, early 90s, late 80s, I think. I can't remember, but this is all getting to be 40, 50 years old now. People always want more. So even if there's a smaller population, people are going to want more and more and more and more. They're going to want a fancier car, bigger house, more air conditioning, whatever. I don't see a close one-to-one connection between the size of the population, whether it's growing or shrinking, and human beings' rapacious demands on material things from the earth. So it's more about material flow through, which has to do with how many times do we get value from say a particular tree that we cut down. Cut down a tree, you burn it, boom, it's gone. You got value, it heated you for a day. Or you can cut down a tree and you can take the bark and make it into something a basket, say, and you can take the wood and make it into furniture that might give you, contribute to your well-being for 100 years. Or you can use the tree in one way, that you can make newsprint out of it, read the newspaper, then you can use that paper for something else. I mean, the real question is, how do we transform the material inputs to our economy, if that's what you want to call it, in a way that gives us value over time, repeated increments of value? How do we, for iron ore, for example, you can recycle those metals. You can recycle things and bring them back into the economic process and the process of contributing to well-being repeatedly. Yeah. And therefore, so that's about that kind of a perspective on where well-being comes from and the relationship of well-being to material inputs
Exactly.
is much more relevant than the question of how big the human population is.
Yeah.
Or even, of course, we have to keep the drawdowns of what ecological economists call natural capital, these material inputs to the society. We have to keep those drawdowns as low as possible through such things as recycling, but also design for sustainability, also maybe controlling or thinking about advertising and social media and our demands for the new rather than the recycled.
Yes.
I mean, that's a social construct.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this design for sustainability, that's my thing. That's what I
know. You're an industrial designer.
Yes, yes. You see my
it's
eyes
really
glowing.
important, Victor.
Well, the thing is how we understand the word design, and that's very interesting. What is happening in the world of design that is moving beyond the physical objects. And it's part of my work. It's part of what I'm doing here with this podcast, and I'm preparing also a book that I'm hoping to at least propose a way of seeing design and the importance of the systemic aspect and the complexity of things. I mean, just discussing one topic now, we have touched so many others. So it's impossible to think about, economic growth without thinking about, the social aspect and the psychological aspect and the ecological aspect. So why talk about economics without a biologist and without a sociologist and without a feminist? Right. I see it as such a clear necessity, and that really bugs me. It troubles me. But
they are all part of the accounting for our home.
Of course, exactly. That's why I wanted to make this etymology of the word economics, because it's our home. It's how we organize and account for the things and the people in our home. Yep. I would like to move on. I know it's time is flying. When conversations are so interesting, this happens all the time. The aspect of feminism in ecological economics. I'm obviously you have made many comments right now about woman's aspect in all of these. But if we could explore a little bit more, you could elaborate a little bit more. What is the contribution of this feminist side in ecological economics, or in economics in general?
Feminist theory has made a number of contributions that I think are really important in thinking about the relationship between economics and well-being. One is the idea of intersectionality. So gender, number one, is not a binary. It's way more complicated. And gender can be seen as one signifier among many for human difference. And so the idea of someone who's a woman may be treated differently from a man, but someone who's a Black woman will be treated even more differently. And someone who's a Black gay woman will be treated even more, so these signifiers that we make as humans, we create them in our culture to help us distinguish and among the people that are in our lives. And it goes back to perhaps, pre-agricultural times when you had to immediely guess who was a friend and who was a foe. But we live in a world now where those kinds of snap judgments and superficial judgments that we make about other people are no longer helpful. They don't help us to create that global community and communicate across differences, to join forces, to join our collective efforts together to solve the problems that exist. And exactly the fact that some people have different lived experiences than others means that we have to bring together and communicate about all those lived experiences in order to solve the problems that are arising in the world. Mm-hmm. Feminist theory is also really useful in going beyond binaries, not talking about it's either this or that, but considering a more multidimensional reality that is also helpful in, I think, in times of climate crisis. And there are other feminist contributions related to the way power works in society, related to a lot of the things that we've been talking about, from population and violence against women to unpaid work. I find feminist economics and feminist ecological economics to be a really rich field of exploration and thought. And women around the world are building movements and literatures and theoretical contributions and practical contributions in many, many ways that often don't receive the right level of recognition and respect in my view. And that's a function of the economic system that we live in. I can use the word patriarchy. It exists. It's all around. And it is fundamental to capitalism.
Yes, no, I agree. I agree completely. I've been trying to inform myself because I'm still ignorant, but a little bit less than before. I've been trying to read in the last few years much more about feminism and intersectionality, and it's the type of information that I have found, at least from my understanding right now, makes or I can make a direct connection between what is necessary in terms of sustainability and sustaining life on the planet, not only human life, but all type of life, and a lot of feminist concepts. I've been trying to talk about this with my students, and I hope I will make it into a chapter of a book that is on the works, where I explain a little bit further this in more detail, because it's not about when I speak about this with some of my male colleagues, some of them have this fear that somehow feminism is looking for revenge, and is looking for the demise of the figure of men, and obviously it's not that. It's not going that direction. I see it as something lacking to give balance to what we have, and a much nicer picture for the future, a much kinder future. And I'll stop there because I'm just making some very personal point now, comments.
Men can be feminists too.
So yeah, of course.
Men can be feminists, and they're welcome.
Absolutely. And again, this is not about making men less or a revenge. It's on the contrary. So going back to the topics, I was mentioning that I'm trying to focus these interviews in the ideas of change, long-term thinking, and limits. I think the topic of limits has been explored already in many ways. I would like just to ask, reaching close the end of this chat, in terms of long-term thinking and economics, it's quite clear that we live in a world that everything is the short-termism. It's everything for the next quarter of profits and what is going to be the next product that we can sell and so on. How do you see economics, or ecological economics, if you want, approaching this idea of long-term thinking?
The COVID crisis and what it has revealed about the ability of governments to inject massive amounts of money into the economy has removed the veil from a lot of people's eyes. I mean, until COVID hit, people still believed that governments needed to balance their budgets, just like people need to balance their budgets. But for a long time, many people have not balanced their budgets. You buy a house, and then you have a huge mortgage. You may or may not pay it off in your lifetime, but the banks don't seem to really care as long as you're contributing your mortgage payment every month, right? The idea of this being an albatross or something that you hang around your neck and that, eventually you want to pay off your debts, it's kind of been eroded over time. And now with governments, billions of dollars in debt. It happened as long ago as the 1990s, early 2000s, when China the United States government changed the rules so that China could be in the GATT, the World Trade Organization. And then suddenly consumers in North America began to buy massive amounts of goods produced in China for money which went to China. The international finance, the whole thing it's a mystery, and it is not explained. For most people, I would say, not for all. It's not explained by neoclassical economics that you learn in universities. So there's a divergence between the way the world actually works and the theoretical tools that we continue to teach our young people, which are supposed to explain to them how these things function. In terms of long-term thinking, what's happened during COVID is that governments have suddenly stepped up and said, we'll give you money to pay your rent if you were working in a job before. We will support workers' salaries if you're working in sectors that we think are important, frontline workers. Will we change the salaries? Will we intervene in the market to the extent that we will pay nurses enough to attract them into the system over the long term? Oh, no, we're not going to do that. We don't want to mess around with the supply and demand system of labor. Mm-hmm. It's just ludicrous how we're expected to believe these things about the way things function. So for long-term thinking about what we really value and what is important in an economic system or a political economy or a culture, I think that what we're seeing with populism and with a sort of a bifurcation in society between those who believe that the decision makers of society have their interests at heart and those who don't, this crisis, if you want to call it that, and I think it is a crisis for democracy. Mm-hmm. It's a crisis for well-being. It's a crisis for equity, for sure. What it means to me is that there's a new and longer term kind of economic thinking that's required. And that has to start with values. It has to start with what kind of society we want to live in. I think most people want to live in a more equitable society than we have now. Most people want to live in a society where everyone has access to healthcare and education and the means for a decent livelihood. And that means not just the people in the country where we live, but the countries everywhere, all over the world. I think that there is an understanding at some level that an equitable world is a desirable world. And because of what we've said before, in my view, it is also that equity is also the key to addressing climate change and to making sure that whatever humans there are living on the earth will be able to continue to live there decently and in a way that allows us to get to a net zero, no additional carbon into the atmosphere type way of living.
Yeah.
So the long-term thinking, it seems to me that capitalism and therefore neoclassical economics is reaching the end of its run. We can't bear it anymore. We can't continue with these kinds of fallacies and injustices. It's over.
I think that's a really good word to use, fallacies. And I have seen many prominent economists really arguing and questioning really core values and core things. There are some interesting podcasts, for example, from the New Economic Thinking Institute. They have a very interesting podcast where I recommend to hear. And I have heard also some very interesting economics. Obviously, Tim Jackson is extraordinary. The things he proposes, and I have heard some interesting things from Mariana Mazzucato. I invite her to the podcast. I hope she says yes, because I will really like to understand some of the things that she proposes. But anyway, I'm going again off topic. I'm sorry. My mind is always connecting things and people. The last bit before we really go to the end of the podcast is about change. And I would like to ask in terms of what you have seen ecological economics has changed in the way the classical economics works. What have been the most important impacts, if any?
I don't think ecological economics has had a big impact on the way the world works or on the discipline of economics. Most ecological economists don't even get hired into economics departments. But,
and why you think is that?
Well, because it's so fundamental, such a fundamental challenge to the way, to the whole sort of canon of the economics discipline. But ecological economists do get invited to talk to government officials for example, in Canada, the Ministry of Natural Resources, or at the level of economic development, or for social decision making. I think government policymakers are at the front lines of looking for tools that help them make decisions in a responsible way, a way that's responsible to taxpayers who are contributing the budget, but also in terms of social values and equity and the other priorities that governments may have. So it's interesting to me that there's more appetite for hearing things about things like the ecological footprint or carbon footprint by decision makers and international groups of governments than there is within the academic discipline.
Okay, good.
But I think the change, the focus for change, the impetus for change comes from the grassroots. It comes from people organizing. It comes from Fridays for Future. It comes from the youth. It comes from the leadership, the incredible leadership of Indigenous people in Canada and across the world to stand up and protect the resources that they feel responsible for, that they still are able to exert responsibility for. That is what is reducing carbon already, the carbon emissions already, as we know from the report that the Indigenous Environment Network published a few months ago, showing that Indigenous leadership and blockades and movements have prevented about 25% of North America's carbon emissions from going into the air. In other words, it's way more important than any government policies.
Yes.
Or any consumption movements.
And it's not accounted for, and it's not in the news.
Oh, it's invisible. Let's look. Let's see.
Okay.
Let's listen.
Yes, absolutely. So we need to close, and I normally close every episode with the same three questions to everyone. And these are very hypothetical, very conceptual. So no right or wrong answers, whatever comes to mind. So here goes the first. The longest living species are cyanobacteria that have existed for more than 2 billion years. And for example, the oldest standing human structure is just a few thousand years. So how do you see human development feasible from this point of view? What should we be doing or stop doing in order to be as successful as a species as a cyanobacteria?
One thing is human longevity on the earth. And I don't think there's any chance that humans will ever outstrip cyanobacteria. They have a big lead. They have a big head start, right? But another question is about human human culture and humans' ability to create the kind of society that reflects values about ethics and human interrelationship across our species and also beyond our species with other species. Those things are more likely to be in our hands.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the challenge for us over the next 30 to 50 years is to bear in mind what our priorities are. What are we trying to do here?
Yes.
Are we trying to grow the economy out of existence? Are we trying to have to devolve into wars and fights over territory and over who has access to what?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we trying to actually create a form of human culture across the species, across the world, that reflects our potential?
Yes. Yes, exactly. That is the human potential that we should not lose from sight, no? The positiveness in human potential. Second question, from your perspective and your experience, what is the importance of failure in discovery and human progress?
Oh, if you don't fail, you don't learn. What's a dead end? Failure is a crucial part. And as anybody who has been involved with developing COVID vaccines or any other important scientific discovery, you fail for 99% of the time until you finally succeed. And then you go, yay.
Why we punish failure in society? Why we fire people when they made a mistake?
Mothers don't do that.
Exactly. Is more the idea of
or many mothers. I shouldn't generalize, but of course when a child is learning to walk, it's going to fall down many times.
Yes.
You be there and you help. You hold their hand. You lift them up again.
There is a word in English that just is escaping my mind. Is not the idea of growth. It's the idea of allowing someone or helping someone to grow. No, and by that I mean personally and mentally and ethically, and is kind of elevating a person. It's part of the education that we get from our parents and society. And I think that's an important aspect that I think we are missing the point that we are always growing and we are always in the need for that
support.
Yes, getting help from everyone to grow. And again, I'm so sorry, the word is slipping my mind. I'm sorry, we need to move on. Then the last question. So describe for us the future of your choosing. You decide how far in the future, 100 years, 1,000 years from now, what period of time will you choose, and what humanity will look like in that moment?
I'm just right off the top of the off the cuff right now. I'd like to live in a world where people are taught not just to walk and talk and make money in the world, but also are taught to respect diversity, to welcome it, to seek out diversity, and to where communication skills and conflict resolution skills are part of the package of wisdom that one generation imparts to another. I think that those skills of conflict resolution and communication across diversity are the single most important thing for human well-being and for human continuance.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been obviously clearly overwhelming, the beautiful answers that I've been getting from all my guests. And what you were saying before, I'm pretty sure every single human being wants to live in a better world, a world that is fair for everyone, and the world where everybody has a chance to live a good life. The complicated part, I guess, is sit down and agree on how to arrive to that point. But thank you very much. It's been wonderful. This chat has been really, really beautiful, and I appreciate so much your time for us here. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thanks a lot. All the best.
As before, I will take just a few more minutes of your time for a couple of last reflections. First of all, I have to say that sadly, Mariana Mazzucato declined my request for an interview. In the final episode of this first season, I will chat about the other experts I tried to reach out. It has been a very interesting experience, and also the many topics that are still to be included in these conversations. The world of economics, as boring or indecipherable as it may be for some of us, it is extraordinarily important. We have lost the meaning and purpose of economics and left it on its own to modify the world for the benefit of the few through the cost for the many, and even the planet itself. As we have heard in other episodes, overall, things come down to a key question: what type of society we want to live in? If we assume we all want to live in a thriving world, where we all have the opportunity to live decent, meaningful lives, we need to start by asking what that means, what that looks like. Gandhi said it long ago: the world has enough for everybody's needs, but not for everybody's greed. A key first point is to give value to natural resources. It cannot be that nature has no value in our economic system. That only promotes the overconsumption of resources to the point of depletion, that, as said by Dr. Perkins, has led to globalisation, colonialism, imperialism, and also collaterally to climate change. If we cannot agree in how to value nature instead, or on top of it, we should give nature legal status as entities. That has been done before for some rivers and forests, and it seems a good path to have a little bit more respect and a better management for the resources of our home. The following key point is, to my view, to stop letting alone the world of economics and economists having the last word, or the most influenced saying in matters related to human development. As it was discussed with Dr. Perkins, all things are connected and are interdependent. Human life is inexorably dependent from ecosystem services. We should include in the decision-making process other experts too. And I know there are other experts that are consulted, but usually final decisions are made taking into consideration exclusively the economic aspect. Lastly, is what we discussed about the necessary reframing on women's access to education, work, and deeper participation in society's decision-making. It is hard to sustain why half the population has been systemically made aside. It is plainly and simply shameful. The conversation with Dr. Perkins was full of many important topics, but I will stop for now. As always, I appreciate greatly you joining me. Your attention and time is much appreciated. There are a couple more interviews coming, so please don't forget to subscribe and comment. And thank you very much. I'll see you in the next one. Future Exploration is produced and written by me, Victor Martinez. Music is composed by Rafael Crux, Udayana Lugo, and Mauro and Daniel Martinez. Future Exploration is licensed under the Creative Commons with attribution and non-commercial use.